stagecoach rattled into Bodie around midday on a Thursday in late October 1879, kicking up frozen dust as it lurched to a halt outside the hotel. The driver, a weathered man called Corbett, brought the horses around and sent a dark stream of tobacco into the mud without so much as glancing at his passenger. "Far as we go," he said. Elias Drummond climbed down, drew his coat against the wind, and got his first real look at Bodie. Before we continue with this story of fraud, murder, and a town that refused to let its secrets die, if you appreciate deep dives into America's darkest historical mysteries, hit that like button and subscribe to Vintage Macabre. We bring you the true stories the history books tried to forget. Now, back to Bodie. Elias was 31, a working journalist at the San Francisco Examiner with more than a decade in the business and a reputation for digging into stories most people preferred to leave alone. Not much impressed him. Not much scared him either. But Bodie gave him pause. The town stretched across a high valley, nearly 8,400 feet up. The air was thin and mean, like the atmosphere itself was holding back. The wind came slicing off the hills with deliberate cruelty. And Bodie was loud, not the energetic roar of a prosperous city, but loud like a barroom fight. Chaotic, dangerous, the kind of sound that could turn violent without warning. He counted 14 saloons on Main Street alone. His assignment was simple: write about the Standard Mine operations and the economic boom. Human interest, optimism. His editor's instructions were clear: don't go looking for trouble. In 11 years of journalism, Elias had never once managed to follow that advice. His first official appointment was with Thomas Vane, owner of the Consolidated Sierra Mining Company. Vane was 52, tall and lean with close-cropped gray hair and pale blue eyes that did the work of his face while the rest maintained careful neutrality. They talked for 90 minutes. Vane was polished, responsive, and said almost nothing of substance. At the end, Vane said, "Bodie's been misrepresented in the press before. Sensationalist nonsense about violence and lawlessness. The reality is a thriving economic community." He paused. The other kind of story tends to discourage investors. And discouraged investors are bad for everyone. Elias left with the distinct impression he'd just been told, in the most civilized way possible, to mind his business. It was on the 4th day that he met Margaret Calhoun at her boarding house on King Street. Maggie was 44, a widow of 6 years, with dark hair going grey at the temples and the kind of self-contained steadiness that came from being the only reliable thing in a chaotic environment for a long time. One morning, as they talked on her porch, she said quietly, "My husband worked for Vane. He died 2 years ago in the mine. It was listed as an accident." The specific way she said listed settled into Elias's journalist brain and stayed there. He went to the county records office and spent 2 hours with accident records. Across an 18-month period, 14 deaths were attributed to mining accidents. What was unusual? Of the 14 deaths, 9 occurred at claims operated by the Consolidated Sierra Mining Company, 3 at the Standard, which employed roughly 3 times more men than Vane's operation. Then he found Aldis Kimura, who managed one of the smaller assay offices. After considerable hesitation, Aldis told him about a miner named Warren Briggs, who'd brought him a sample 6 months earlier. The sample showed gold values that were inconsistent, much higher than they should have been, in a way that suggested the ore had been introduced. Salted, one of the oldest frauds in the mining industry. "What happened to Briggs?" Elias asked. "He left Bodie," Aldis said, "or he was reported to have left. 2 weeks after he came to see me, without his tools, without the wages owed to him." Elias found Abel Reyes, who'd worked for Vane and had accidentally entered a sealed shaft called Number 4. "The shaft wasn't being worked," Reyes said. "But there was chemical equipment, large tanks, tubes, the kind you'd use to treat ore. He paused. 3 days after I saw it, a man named Garcia didn't come to work. His landlady said he'd left, but his hat was still on the hook by the door. Maggie Calhoun helped Elias plan his next move. Her boarder, Percy Holt, worked the night shift at the Consolidated Sierra. "The night foreman leaves the site at 2 in the morning for an hour," she said. "That's your window." 3 nights later, Elias entered the mine with Reyes and a photographer named Cobb. They found the chemical equipment exactly as described. And in a wooden crate, Elias found a ledger in Thomas Vane's handwriting describing a systematic program of ore treatment dating back 22 months. The total investment secured through the fraud exceeded $400,000. The story ran in the San Francisco Examiner on November 14, 1879. Bodie mine operator accused of systematic fraud. Deaths of workers connected to elaborate scheme. Thomas Vane was arrested on December 22nd. The trial began in March of 1880. Aldous Kimura testified about the sample. Abel Reyes testified about number 4 shaft. The photographs and ledger were entered into evidence. The jury deliberated for 1 day. Thomas Vane was convicted of fraud, conspiracy, and 3 counts of criminal negligence. He was sentenced to 12 years in San Quentin. He served 7 before his health collapsed. He died in 1887, having never publicly acknowledged that a single word of the charges was true. Warren Briggs was never found. By 1890, Bodie's population had fallen from 10,000 to a few hundred. By 1940, it was empty, but the buildings stood. The cold, dry altitude preserved them. The state of California declared it a historic park in 1962 with a policy called arrested decay. The buildings would be held at this permanent still point of abandonment. Thousands came every year to walk the streets and look through windows at the frozen interiors. Some took things, a nail, a piece of glass, a small souvenir. And some of them sent those things back with letters describing misfortune, accidents, illness, bad luck that felt like something else. Like an account being settled. The Rangers placed the returned objects in a collection they called, among themselves, the Guilt Box. Elias Drummond died in San Francisco in 1921. He left his notebooks to the California Historical Society. 40 years later, a graduate student found pressed between the pages a faded photograph of Bodie in 1879. Below it, in Elias's handwriting, a single line. "The town knows what happened here. It always has. What Bodie knew, it kept. The desert held it. The cold preserved it. The buildings stood, the objects remained, and the dust remembered everything."